Hi guys, so this is part 2 of answering your questions about area and volume. So this question was from Diana, and she wanted to know, is there an easier way to remember in what circumstances you use which formulas? So the way I always remember is if area is top minus bottom, well, I shouldn't say if area. Area is top minus bottom and volume has more. And so the way I think of it is that the volume of something, of a 3D object, is going to be greater than just the area of a 2D object. So my value should be worth more. And so if you have pi before it, you're multiplying something by 3. That's the first thing, so it's a bigger number. And when you square something, you're making it bigger. So volume I always think of as the bigger thing and area as the smaller thing, and that's how I keep those straight, and I remember when to square it and when not to square it. So I hope that helps. Okay, the next question, I feel like I'm on a radio station, and the next caller's question is from Ruby. How would you remember each formula and decide which one to use? And I believe I've already answered that in part 1 of my radio show. Okay, the next question is from Eliana. When using the shell method, where does the x come from? For example, in the 2 pi going from, okay, so this is her example. And her question is, she literally wrote this, what is this? Okay, so that actually represents the height, and I think I spoke to Osman about this, so only he was listening. And because you're going over the y-axis but using an x, so I don't know, let's pretend that like this is your picture here. You're going this way. X actually represents the distance from the y-axis. Let me get another color. Okay, from the y-axis to some x value. I don't know, let's just say here. So it would be it's a height going from here to here. Because you're going in an opposite direction. So it just actually represents a height. The good news is that you don't have to change it each time. It's just x, because if I'm going from here to here, that's my height, and that's the x value, whatever that x is. If I go from here to here, then it's this x value, whatever that value is. Eliana also asked, where did we get 2 pi from? It's really looking like 2 pi r in a way, right? But it's just a little bit more. So it's really, before you could have thought of it as like this was pi, and this was r squared, and now it's like 2 pi, let me get another color. So this is the 2 pi and the r, if you want to kind of think of it like that. But this is just like some formula that some genius came up with, and that's what we use. Okay, next question is from Teresa. Ooh, she's got a lot of questions. So how do you know when to use the washer method and the shell method? So the shell method we talked about in part 1 of these videos. When to use the washer method. So remember, the washer method is when it looks like that. So that would happen when you have like a picture something like this, where one side of this enclosure is not the axis, as compared to something like this, then one side of it is the axis. Whereas you can see on this one, the axis plays no role. So when it's not hitting the axes, that's when it's going to be a washer method. In reality, you don't have to remember 2 different things. If you do it this way, it's top minus bottom. If you do it this way, it's also top minus bottom, but the bottom is just equal to 0. Okay, here's question number 2 from Teresa. Oh, will I be able to start doing after-school tutoring? So, excuse me, yes, I did send out an email that we will have tutoring this week on Thursday. Teresa's next question is, to evaluate or not to evaluate the integral, what does that mean? Great question. Okay, so let's say that this is my integral. So if I want to evaluate it, that means I'm going to solve it. I'm going to go to x to the 3 over 3, going from 0 to 2, and then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to keep solving that. If I'm not going to evaluate it, then that means that I just leave it like this. That means that they just want to know, do you know the setup? Like, I guess they're assuming at this point in the year, if you can set it up, you'll know how to solve it. So If it says to evaluate, you must solve it. If it says set up but do not evaluate, then you just leave the setup, don't find the answer. Okay, and this is also from Teresa. Is there a way to plug into the calculator the given slope for problems revolving around the x-axis? No. The answer is no, I'm sorry. Yeah, no. I wish there was, but no. Okay, the next question is from Tiffany. How do I know which formula to use? So we've already answered that. Is there a way to memorize the formulas 100% correctly without mixing them up? I mean, I gave a hint before about that area should always be smaller than the volume of something, and this is just one of those things like you have to memorize. I'm sorry. I mean, without mixing them up, I guess like for cross sections, like when it says perpendicular to the x-axis, you know it's going to be dx. Perpendicular to the y-axis would be dy. I really just think it's practice and doing them over and over until you just get very used to like what the formula is and just quickly writing it. Tiffany's next question is, how do I know if it's top to bottom, left to right? Okay, I think I already addressed that in part 1, but I'll just do that again. So let's say this is our piece and we're revolving this way. That means we started on the right and we're going to the left, so it would be right minus left. Let's say this is the picture and we're revolving over the x-axis. Then I started on the top, I'm going to the bottom. So that means it's top minus bottom. Let's say that this is my picture and I'm revolving up here. Okay, then I started on the bottom and I'm going to the top. So I would be bottom minus top. Tiffany's next question is, how do you know if you should square something? We always square with volume, never with area, but we square with the volume unless we're using the shell method or cross sections. And Tiffany's next question is, this is great that you guys have so many questions. If I use the wrong formula, could I still get the right answer? It's possible. Sometimes, you know, crazy things just kind of happen, but they're going to check your work because this is a free response question. But the good news is that you could get partial credit for maybe doing part of a setup correctly. So even if you're not positive about what to do, just do something. You just never know if you can get some credit. Okay, the next question is from Casey. Casey wants to know, how do I know what specific volume formula to use? So we've already addressed that. Angelica. How come washers and discs have the same formula if one has a hole in the middle and the other has a bowl shape? Okay, so I think I kind of answered this with, maybe it was Teresa's question, I think. So when it's something like this, and then you're going to come over and look like this, yes, there's going to be a hole in the middle, but it's still top minus bottom. And that ends up removing this whole space inside. But if it's touching the axes, and it looks like this, and now it comes over here, it's still top minus bottom, and in this case, this is the bottom. And it's just minus 0. So for this top one, when you're subtracting something, you're going to have a smaller piece, and that takes into account that hole in the middle that you're going to have. Whereas this one, the bottom piece is just 0, so you're not subtracting anything, and you're going to have a bigger piece. Okay, I hope I answered that question. The next question is from Osman. Oh, how do we figure out the intervals? And he means like what goes here and what goes here. Okay, so sometimes you're given the interval, and that's so great, and then you would just know it goes from 2 to 3. The smaller number always goes on the bottom. But if you're not given the interval, then the way you can find the interval is by setting the two functions that you're given equal to each other. So for example, let's say one of the functions is x squared, and one of the functions is, I don't know, x plus 2. Set them equal to each other, solve it. Even if it's not factorable, just whatever it is, you could set it equal to 0, put it in your calculator and do second calc, and then choose the one that says 0. And whatever value, you'll always get two values, and whatever those values are, that's what you would put up here. Sometimes you might end up getting something that looks like, for example, radical x. Okay, so radical x looks something like this. And it can never be less than 0. So even though they might not say that it's stopping over here at the y-axis, you know that the smallest number has to be 0. Or let's say that you had the function like radical x minus 3. Okay, that just means a square root picture, but it's going to start at 3, so it's going to go like that. So you would know the smallest value is going to be 3, and then they'll cut you off somewhere else. Okay, I hope I answered that question. All right, the next question is from Brianna L. And she wants to know, if you aren't given an interval, do you always have to set both equations equal to each other in order to find the interval? Yes, under most circumstances, except for what I just said previously to Osman's question. And Brianna L. also wants to know, do you always have to try isolating x to determine whether or not to use the shell method? Or can you solve any problem with any method? Some people really like the shell method, and once they see that they're going over the y-axis, they just automatically will use the shell method if they have their things in terms of dx. It's a personal choice, really. For me, I don't like the shell method. I don't know. That's just me. So I would try to first get it into x equals if I had to go over the y-axis, but it's just a personal choice. So I would try to isolate it. If I couldn't do it, then of course I have to do the shell method. But you might not mind the shell method, and then just go right to the shell method. Another question Mariana asked is, can you solve any problem with any method? No. If, let's say, you have your piece here and you need to revolve down here, this has to be a top minus bottom. There is no shell method for going over the x-axis that way. Also, you can't use like a cross-section method for revolving around the y-axis. Okay. The next question is from Natalia. How do you know which method to use? And I think I've already answered that. The next one is from Claudia. How do you determine which interval to use? I already talked about that. Oh, okay. She means by whether you should use the x-coordinates or the y-coordinates. So that's a good question. Okay, so before, I think it was Osman's question, I said you're going to set them equal to each other and look for the smallest and the biggest x values. This would be for dx. Okay, so when do you use the x-coordinates or the y-coordinates? Well, if your function is going to be a dy, then these must be y values. If it's dx, then these must be x values. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Vanessa is asking, when do you know to use the shell method? And I already explained that, but she asked, what are the steps for the shell method? So good question. So for the steps for the shell method, it's going to be an integral, and it's definitely going to be a dx. So I guess I would say the steps would be to find the intervals in terms of x. Not intervals, sorry. In terms of x, right? Because this value up here and this value up here, we're talking about x. And then I would just say substitute to the formula. Really, that's it. Yeah, but I guess number one would always be to first find the interval in terms of x. Okay? Let's see. Franklin is asking, how do we know when to use the shell method? For example, when to use dy or dx. Shell method is always dx. Okay, so shell method is dx. Okay, shell method is not dy. Okay, let's see what Franklin also says. I am unsure of when to use the top minus bottom formula, when to use the left minus right formula. Okay, so I think I answered that. Okay, Isa is asking about how to use the shell method. And I went over that. She's asking, is there a list of each method? Yes. And so, Isa, if you could please remind me in class, and I have a beautiful sheet that can tell you everything, and I'll print that out for you. And I think we're done. I'm up to Gabriella now, and I think I did her on that first video. But Gabriella, if you could just let me know if I answered your question on the first video. If not, I'll make another video. Okay, that's enough for now.